Hey everyone, welcome back. This is lesson 6.5, finding real roots of polynomial equations. This lesson is rather complicated, so I'm going to break it down into a couple of videos for you. So let's just go ahead and get started. The objectives for today are to identify the multiplicity of roots, use the rational root theorem and the irrational root theorem to solve polynomial equations. Your vocabulary for this lesson will be multiplicity. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to use factoring to solve polynomial equations. In lesson 6.4, you used several methods for factoring polynomials. As with some quadratic equations, factoring a polynomial equation is one way to find its real roots. Let's remember what that means to find real roots. Well, real roots is telling us what is x when y is equal to 0. What is x when y equals to 0? And what that tells us is where our parabola or where our graph is going to cross the x-axis. So let's just use an example. Let's say we have the equation x squared plus 8x plus 15. And we want to find the real root of that. So we would set it equal to 0 because we want to know what is x going to be when y equals 0. All right, so once I have this, it's kind of hard to figure out, but what I can do is factor this equation. And so when I factor, I always do my little x. I take 15 on the top and my 8 down here, and I say what two numbers multiply together to get 15 and add together to get 8? Well, I know 5 times 3 is 15, and 5 plus 3 is 8. So that's going to be it. So I'm going to say x plus 5 times x plus 3 equals 0. And now all I have to do is solve for my x. Well, if both of these multiply together to get 0, I know that one of them has to equal 0 in order for the whole thing to be 0. So I know that x plus 5 equals 0, and I know that x plus 3 equals 0. So solving for x, subtract 5 from both sides. So that gives me x equals negative 5. Here we'll subtract 3 from both sides. So that tells me that x equals negative 3. So the real roots of this equation would be negative 5 and negative 3. And since this is a quadratic equation, we know it makes a parabola. Okay, and so it says when x is negative 5, y is 0. And it also says when x is negative 3, y is 0. All right, so now my parabola, I know, is going to look something like this. All right, so I have just found the real roots of this equation. Now, in this lesson, we're going to be using polynomials, not just quadratics, which are a little easier. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated, but these are two things that you're going to need to remember. How to factor, and the next thing I want you to remember is the zero product property. All right, and we just talked about the zero product property just a minute ago when it says you can find the roots or solutions of a polynomial equation by p of x equals 0 by setting each factor equal to 0 and solving for x. So just as a review, we had x squared plus 8x plus 15, and we factored that to x plus 5 and x plus 3, and here it says to set it equal to 0. All right, and now one of these two has to be 0, so x plus 5 equals 0, or x plus 3 equals 0, giving us x equals negative 5 or x equals negative 3. All right, so that's it with the quadratic equation. Now we're going to do a little bit more complicated problems with the polynomial equation. So here's the first sample problem. It says solve the polynomial equation by factoring. All right, so we've done this back in lesson 6.4. And the first thing we do when we look at this is there something we can take out of all of these numbers? We have 4x to the 6, 4x to the 5th, and 4x to the 4th. And I see that each of these terms has a 4 and an x to the 4th in it. So I'm actually going to factor out 4x to the 4th. And what that will leave me with is with x squared plus x plus a negative 6 equals 0. All right. Now, the problem said solve the polynomial equation by factoring. That means that I'm trying to find the roots, all right, or what is x when y equals 0. All right, so I'm getting close, but I can see this x squared plus x minus 6 is actually a pretty easy thing to factor out now. I put my negative 6 up here and a positive 1. So what two numbers multiply together to get negative 6, add together to get 1? Well, I know that's 3 times negative 2. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6, and 3 plus negative 2 is 1. So I know that I'm going to have x plus 3
supposedly I was talking
and
into
x
here,
minus 2. And that's going to all
supposedly
equal
recording
0, and I also
here.
have a 4x to the 4th out
But
there.
I feel like I'm in a
Now I'm going to use
tunnel
my
or something
0,
in a closet.
and I'm
Hear my
going to
voice
set
there?
each of these
I don't know
up
how
to equal
to
0. So I'm going to say
fix
4x to the 4th
that. And
equals
I'd like
0,
to get
or
some of the
x
trouble
plus
out and make
3
me not sound like such a
equals
5-year-old.
0, or
talking
x
on here.
minus 2
Well, Mike
equals
isn't going
0.
to help with that.
All right, so
I know,
if
but
I
there
divide
seems
by
like
4
there should
on
be some
both
ways.
sides,
Right
I
now
have
I'm
x to the
recording
4th
this.
equals 0, so x equals 0. Here I have, if I subtract 3 on both sides, I end up with x equals negative 3. And here if I add 2 to both sides, I get x equals 2.
Okay.
So, in the end, the
Yes,
real
but I'm recording right now, so.
roots
Okay, that means I've already
are 0,
I've already done it
negative
all,
3,
and
and
now
2.
I'm going through my recording
And that's all there is to do on that
so
one.
I can make it into
Let's
a
try
video
another
so
one.
I can send it off to
Sorry, one more that you could do. You could also put this in your
instead of going
calculator
straight from
and
PowerPoint,
see
So
the
I
graph,
recorded
and
it
you
in
would see that
PowerPoint.
there are,
and
this
then
graph actually
I
goes down more
recorded
like
in
this,
OBS
and then
Studio,
comes and does that,
8
something like
copies,
that.
and then upload
But you can see that
PowerPoint,
when
and it makes
y
it
is
into a
0,
video MP4
the graph
player,
touches
an
at
MP4 video, and then
negative
once I have that, then
3,
I can just record it
0, and positive 2.
to YouTube.
Okay, so next we have another problem. So solve the polynomial equation by factoring again. So again, we're going to be looking for the roots. And the first thing we need to do is go ahead and set this equal to 0. All right, so let's subtract negative 26x squared on both sides, negative 26x squared. And that leaves us with x to the 4th minus 26x squared plus 25. Now, we're used to seeing 2 and 1 here, but it's still going to work out just fine because we've just doubled our x's, and so we're still going to be able to do it. So once again, we want to factor that. We want to say two numbers that multiply together to get positive 25, add together to get negative 26. Well, 25 times 1 is getting me close, but let's just change our signs. Negative 25 and negative 1 gives me a positive 25, and negative 25 plus a positive 1, negative 1, gives me a negative 26. So what we're going to say here is x squared minus 25 times x squared minus 1. So notice, since this was a 4, I changed it to 2 and 2 there. Okay, so we're not quite finished because these can also be factored. So x squared minus 25, I notice that is the difference of two perfect squares. So that's going to be x plus 5 times x minus 5. And notice x squared minus 1 is also the difference of two perfect squares, because don't forget, 1 times 1 is a perfect square. So that's going to be x plus 1 and x minus 1. Okay, so now remember, we want to set all that equal to 0 because we're trying to solve, and we want to find out what is x when y is 0. So I know that x plus 5 could equal 0, or x minus 5 could equal 0. x plus 1, or x minus 1. Sorry. And each of those, if one of them is true, it's going to make the whole thing equal 0, so that it'll be that these will be all of our roots. So x can either equal negative 5, x equals 5, x equals negative 1, or x equals 1. So when we solve this, we'll find out that the roots are negative 5, 5, negative 1, and 1. And that's your answer. That's all you would need to do for that. Okay, why don't you try 2 on your own real quick. Try the first one. All right, try this one on your own. Turn the video off and then turn it back on when you're ready to check it. Okay, so looking at this one, the first thing we want to do is see if there's something that we can easily factor out. And as a matter of fact, I see that there's a 2 in everything. And I also see that there's an x to the 4th in everything, each of those. So I'm going to factor out 2x to the 4th. And that is going to leave me with x squared minus 5x minus 6. And all of that is going to equal 0. Okay, well, I'm getting pretty close. I see that I could factor this one a little bit more. So I'm going to look at two numbers that multiply together to get negative 6, add together to get negative 5. Well, I think that's going to be negative 6 times a positive 1. Negative 6 times 1 is all absolutely negative 6, and negative 6 plus a positive 1 is negative 5. So I'm going to bring my 2x to the 4th down, x minus 6, and x plus 1. And I know all of that is going to equal to 0 because I'm looking for when y is 0, what is x? Okay, so let's just go ahead and find out. We're going to say 2x to the 4th could equal 0, x minus 6 could equal 0, or x plus 1 equals 0. And when we solve that out, we see that x is going to equal 0, x will equal 6, or x will equal negative 1. All right, so the roots, when we solve this, we're just looking for the roots. The roots are going to be 0, 6, or negative 1. All right. Try this last one on your own. Solve the polynomial equation by factoring. Go ahead and turn the video off for just a minute and give it a try. Okay, welcome back. So on this one of the things you might have tried at first is you might have just looked at this piece right here and said, oh, look, it has a common x in everything. So I'm going to take out an x. That leaves me with x squared minus 2x minus 25. And all of that has to equal negative 50. Okay, you might have done that, but then you get to this step and say, oh no, what do I do now? So let's remember the very first thing I want you to do is go ahead and set it equal to 0. So let's change that to say x to the 3rd minus 2x squared minus 25x plus 50. Let's add 50 to both sides, and that's going to equal to 0. Now we're going to be able to do our problem much easier. So when I look at this one, I see, okay, I don't have an x in every single term, and I don't have a 5 or a 2, so I'm going to have to do some different kind of factoring. So first of all, I'm going to change this minus to plus the opposite. And I'm going to go ahead and group some of these together like this. And so now I'm going to just look at this piece, and I'm going to say, can I factor anything out of here? Well, I can factor an x squared. So let's take an x squared out. That leaves me with x minus 2. And over here, I can see that I can factor out a negative 25x, or just a negative 25, and that's going to leave me with x minus 2 also. And remember, that all equals to 0. So now I can actually factor out my x minus 2, and that leaves me with x squared minus 25 equals 0. But I'm not quite finished because remember, look at this. This is the difference of two perfect squares. Okay, so I've got x minus 2, and then x squared minus 25 is the same as x plus 5 and x minus 5. And all that equals to 0. So I know that x minus 2 equals 0, x plus 5 could equal 0, or x minus 5 equals 0. So x is going to equal 2, or x could equal negative 5, or x could equal positive 5. So in the end, the roots are going to be 2, negative 5, and 5. And that's your answer. All right. I hope you understood that. This part is the easy one. It's time for an intermission. So why don't you turn the video off, take a break, stretch your legs, and then come back for the next section. Have a good day. Bye.